So Jeff, can you start by telling us all about prisonist.org and why you decided to make it your personal and professional mission?
Sure. Thanks for having me on your show, Tracy. Well, prisonist.org is a prison ministry that focuses on delivering services to the white-collar justice community, which could be someone who is prosecuted for white-collar crime, or their family member, or other people in the white-collar ecosystem, which could be lawyers, defense attorneys, judges, all kinds of people who are involved in the process. Mostly the reason that I'm involved in it is because I went to prison for a white-collar crime. And that's the direction that my passion and my calling took after I got out of prison for my white-collar crime. I went to Union Theological Seminary, and for 3 years, I got a Master of Divinity. Then I worked in an inner city church for a couple of years. I became ordained. And then my wife and I, Lynn Springer, started this ministry, and it's been the greatest gift of my life.
Wow. All right. So love that story. Can you give a little depth about why you ended up in prison yourself?
Sure. It's actually a very topical issue right now because I committed SBA loan fraud. And for all these years where I've either been in the criminal justice system or talking about it or preaching about it, I talked about white-collar crime and what it's really about and kind of dispelling the myths and trying to bring empathy and compassion to families going through it, because it's a very misunderstood and castigated constituency. But I never really talked about disaster loan fraud or SBA loan fraud, the particulars of my crime, because it wasn't all that interesting. It was something that happened post 9/11, and that set of circumstances has certainly developed a few other times in history since, post Katrina, for example, post Superstorm Sandy. There are people who commit fraud in trying to get resources that they're not entitled to under those laws. So back when the pandemic was starting in last year, in March of last year, when it became apparent that this was going to be massive, and the SBA started to make itself known or put information out there that there was going to be a large loan pool, I said, well, wait a second, this is exactly what happened in post 9/11. And although I've accepted complete responsibility for my behavior, that the nuances of what was going on with the government making so much money available and the rules not being particularly clear this time, they were much clearer post 9/11, by the way, but this time are going to drag a lot of people either knowingly or unknowingly into this pool of either people who are committing fraud or who are making big mistakes for a lot of different reasons. So, but even before the first dollar was given out, I wrote an article for Entrepreneur magazine and about things to watch out for when taking SBA disaster loan money. And it turned out to be the number 4 most read article of the year in Entrepreneur, over 1 million views. And that kind of launched me into discussing SBA loan fraud as one of the major things that I do. And it feels like a gift to be able to explore share my experience and hopefully save people from the kind of pain that my family and I went through.
Well, you're right. It is so timely. And I'm thinking about that. I know so many people who took an SBA loan this time around because they could without looking at the parameters. And then, of course, we saw all the stories on the news about people who had taken it that were really sort of, more obvious stories. And a lot of them had to give it back because they didn't really need it. So you're right. A lot of people are going to get swept up in that. And we need to know the link to that article for all these listeners. So we'll get that at the end for sure.
For sure.
Okay, good. And so let's talk about white collar crime, because it's something I don't know that a lot of people think about. And obviously the most, one of the big examples on television recently was the college entrance scandal with Massimo and his wife, Lori Loughlin, and they both ended up going to prison. And the other one I think about, just because I was fascinated by the documentary, is Craig Carton, who used to be partners with Boomer. They had a great show, Boomer and Carton, and he got into a lot of trouble with gambling and money. And so how do you describe white collar crime and how prevalent is it?
Well, white collar crime is typically a financial crime, but it's always a crime of some kind of breach of trust. And so there can be a violent component to it or not. There can be a drug or alcohol component to it or not. But almost always there are underlying issues that are going on with the people who commit white collar crimes. And it could be drug or alcohol, but it could be also mental health issues. There can be underlying societal issues that we know go on in, especially in affluent communities, to succeed despite the risks and kind of all costs, type A personalities. And these things come from some hidden places. They come from childhood trauma often. And people don't really understand that the underpinnings of white collar crime are very similar to, say, alcoholism and what you would learn in an AA room or in a recovery room. And we as a society have developed a lot more compassion and understanding for people who have those kind of problems, but yet we still kind of castigate and stigmatize people who've committed white collar crimes. I understand why that happens because of the way that you introduced the question. Mostly what we know about white collar crime is from the media, and that's basically the big cases, the name brand cases. Lori Loughlin is a perfect example of someone who, in the white collar world, did not commit such a heinous crime. I mean, I'm not condoning her behavior, but the amount of press she got was completely disproportionate to the crime itself. But she's a celebrity. And so the people who tend to skew our perception of white collar crime develop some kind of celebrity status. Sometimes it's because of the crime itself. Sometimes it's because they're already a celebrity. And as an underlying issue within our society, we kind of have schadenfreude. We get some kind of sick joy from watching the successful people fall. And so I remember when I was younger, there was a show on TV called Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous.
Yes.
And
Robin Leach.
Robin Leach, right, exactly. And it was very, very popular. Yeah. But you know that what's even more popular is the fall of people who were living the lifestyles of the rich and famous, because that's the train wreck. That's the people stopping at the, slowing down at the crash scene at the side of the road. What really is going on in white collar crime is 99% of the crimes are not newsworthy. It's people it's the parents of people your kids go to school with. It's the lawyer down the street. It's the doctor down the street. It's the nurse who got into the prescription formulary and because of an addiction. It's people who've just are going about their lives. Now I'm not condoning behavior. I want everyone to take responsibility for their behavior. That's part of our program, but still to be skewed as a community of people because of the famous outliers creates so much stigma and so many lack of opportunities for people to get back on their feet. So within our ministry, we embrace everybody. And I've had people who are on the front page of the New York Times and Wall Street Journal and on CNBC. And I've had people, many more, be with us who you've never heard of, nor would you ever hear of them. And so as a community, what we've done is we've learned to learn from each other and grow from each other and share resources. And come out of isolation into this community, mostly online. We were way ahead of the curve, Tracy, because unlike, say, an AA meeting where you basically go to a meeting with people in your town, it's geographically based.
Yes.
But white collar crime is all over the country, people living in little pockets in isolation. And because of technology, 5 years ago, we were able to start support group meetings. Technology back then was not what it is now on Zoom or on other platforms. But we brought people into their little boxes, just like we have on a Zoom call. And it's been such a gift to see people be able to talk about their problems with people who understand, because mostly when you're being prosecuted for a white collar crime, you don't talk to anybody about anything. Your lawyer won't allow you to talk to anyone about anything. So they talk to me because I have privilege, I have confidentiality. I'm an ordained minister, but also within the group context, that's part of our program. And we ask people who are going currently through their criminal issues not to be specific about their crimes. But once they've been through them, then people are incredibly specific and very helpful.
So you bring up something really interesting, which is one of the perceptions of white collar crime is that, well, so what? So you go to a federal prison, it's like a country club. And we hear that all the time.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people don't believe that the punishment fits the crime in terms of white collar crime. So what do you have to say to that?
Well, it's prison. And people will spend a lot of money and a lot of their resources hiring expensive lawyers because they don't want to go to prison.
Right.
So it's not like they're happily looking forward to going away to summer camp.
Right.
People do not want to go to prison. And prison in this case really is a life sentence because you can never go back to your old life. If you were a hedge fund manager or a trader or a lawyer, huge barriers of entry back into your old life. For many people, most people, they can't go back to their old life at all. So what's really the punishment? Prison is actually the smallest part of the punishment. The largest part of it is dealing with all the wreckage and dealing with the family issues, and the divorce rate is huge and the estrangement from families is huge, and the poverty, because people think that white collar criminals are rich. And the answer to that is many of them were, but very few of them are anymore. So what does that mean? It means that they're stuck out there without resources, without any context of how to be able to deal with their life moving forward. To be more direct, prison camps, if you have to be in prison, a prison camp is a pretty good place to be. I didn't serve in a prison camp. I served in a real prison. And so bars, controlled movements. I was on a compound with 1,500 drug dealers, basically. And in it, there were, in the population, there were 5 former stockbrokers, 2 former doctors, and I was the only former lawyer. And then a sea of people who were not white collar. And it was a horrifying, terrible experience, but also profound and helped me grow in ways that I never would have but for that experience.
Oh, absolutely. I'm even thinking about Massimo Giannulli, because he kept asking to come home because he's really troubled by the isolation piece of this. And again, I don't know how much of that is true, but that was the big news story. And I have to imagine, one, it's incredibly scary. It brings you to your knees. And in terms of if you have to experience isolation, that has to be really life-changing.
Well, there's an example of where I am sure that he is going through something that he never expected to go through in his life. And it's life-altering for sure. But I also know that he's one of the lucky ones who will be able to come out to a fortune and be able to live in this new house that they bought, if the news is reported accurately. So money solves a lot of the comfort problems. I mean, the problems of having to pay a mortgage,
Yeah.
but I'm also always wary of whether or not the money is masking the real growth opportunity, the spiritual transformation opportunity. For some, people come out and they have a lot of money, or they haven't lost everything, and they still are going through their spiritual transformation. And that's basically from a material way of life to a spiritual way of life, and dedicating themselves to help others. And some we never hear from again. And they really don't help members of the white collar community. So as a community, one of the biggest issues we have is that the great unexpressed desire of people who are going through these issues is to get their whole life back, or to assimilate into society and never have to be identified again as a white collar criminal. But if people were really dedicated to giving back and to lifting up the community, one, because of the mistakes they've made, and two, because hopefully by bringing resources to the community, we're actually able to spread a message that is also a cautionary tale and preventative, then Martha Stewart, for example, would be one of our greatest contributors.
Right.
And I'm just singling her out because she's a very famous person who has a lot of money and who could single-handedly change the trajectory for thousands or even tens of thousands of people and families going through these issues.
Well, who knows? Maybe she'll watch this interview and she will join. You never know.
Martha, contact me.
All right, so I want to switch gears to your bio, where you mentioned that you have been sober for 18 years. Can you talk about that for a moment? Because I think that's a big issue for a lot of people who will be watching today.
Sure. I hold my sobriety at the center of my spirituality. Mm-hmm. It was the greatest gift and greatest accomplishment of my life. And still, I slid down into the abyss after 10 years of opioid abuse, prescription opioid abuse. And I had friends who were more than willing to prescribe for me, who were doctors. I don't blame them. I am positive that I manipulated them into it.
Yeah.
But that was my Jones. That was my addiction speaking. And when in July of 2002, when everything kind of crashed, and I tried to kill myself with a overdose of Demerol, actually. When I found myself going through detox and then in rehab, those 7 weeks in rehab were the first moments of clarity that I had in probably 30 years. I had been undiagnosed bipolar, and I was self-medicating. Mm-hmm. I wasn't a choir boy before those 10 years, but I certainly wasn't deep in the way I was during these 10 years. And I found recovery. And it's been about 18 and a half years now I've been sober. I've been to over 9,000 recovery meetings. And it's cultural. It's a way of life. What I needed when I first lost my law license and my job and my home and my family, when I lost all of that, I needed the structure and support and care and love that I found in recovery. And then I went through the steps and I got a sponsor, and that prepared me for what would happen 20 months into sobriety, when I got a call from federal agents that there was a warrant out for my arrest. That was in connection with the SBA loan I took, and I post 9/11, and I had defrauded the federal government, and I had taken advantage of a national emergency. I knew better. I was a lawyer. I was a business lawyer. Right. I knew better, and I misused the funds. Another thing that's going on right now that's very current is not only do people are people defrauding the government into getting the funds, but then they're misusing the funds when they get them, which is a separate crime. So in my case, most of the funds I misused were I repaid personal credit cards that I had run up to try to save my business. And if you look at the terms of an SBA loan, you're not allowed to pay off debt. You're not even allowed to pay off personal debt for sure. But this madness of people going out and buying Lamborghinis and Ferraris and is just a symptom of the sickness that we have as a society, and the lack of controls and the need for the government to be pushing out all this money right now, which is a good thing because hopefully they're saving a lot of businesses. But one of the things I write about in the Entrepreneur article is that you can't save your business and your lifestyle at the same time. And if the money is dedicated to saving the business, then that means you got to cut your lifestyle way back. And so one of the gifts that I had in early sobriety, circling back to that question, is that I had a hard bottom very quickly. So this is a point that people, I think, gets lost. If you live in a 10,000 square foot house, if you go from a 10,000 square foot house to a 4,000 square foot house to a 2,000 square foot house to a 2-bedroom apartment to 10 years later, you're in a shelter, you've ridden the escalator all the way down to destruction.
Yeah.
What I tell people, if they can listen, which is rare, but if they listen, is go from the 10,000 square foot house to the shelter and then work your way back up.
Right.
That is not an easy message to hear. But some people don't have a choice. And I was one of them. I didn't have a choice because I had lost everything.
Well, let's talk about lifestyle, because you bring up an important point, and it does bring me to my next question, which is so many people that I work with in my coaching are on the blurred lines of drinking. How much is keeping their social life alive? How much is getting them into trouble in relationships with their marriages, or the hangover the next day, or not functioning as a good parent or going to work? They don't want to give it up because there's an upside to the drinking, which is lifestyle, which is the country club party, or we're all going skiing in Jackson Hole and it's big dinners out every night and the champagne is flowing. They don't want to give that up, even though there's an underbelly to their drinking. And so what advice do you have for those people?
If I understand that every time you drink, maybe you're not getting into trouble. But if every time you've gotten into trouble, you were drinking, then you know you have a problem. And I can't tell you how many people, especially around neighborhoods like Greenwich or Rye or Darien or Westport, where their life spun out of control because alcohol or drugs had something to do with it. And it doesn't have to be your own, by the way. It could be your kid getting pulled over in the middle of the night driving his Porsche. And I'm just being intentionally dramatic here. But I've gotten calls through my life when I was a lawyer, and now as a minister, I get calls from people who, oh my God, what do we do? My kid got into a fight at school, or my kid got pulled over in the middle of the night. What do we do? And my answer is always the same. Always the same. If your kid has a problem, your family has a problem, your business has a problem, and you are drinking or you are doing drugs, my answer is always the same. Work on yourself. Because usually these things are a family problem. And what you can do is you can effectuate change unto yourself. So really, what are the goals? I mean, what I've learned through my spirituality, what I've learned through my transformation, is that everything that goes on is an opportunity to work on my character and get closer to God. So do I really want that deal? Do I really want that client? Do I really want to be the life of the party at the country club? I've done all that. And the answer is, at what cost? And sometimes if you are healthy and balanced and you have a good, healthy blend of mind, body, spirit, then maybe drinking isn't a problem and that lifestyle is right for you. But I don't hear from those people. Those aren't the people that call me. The people that call me are the people who have teetered over the line. I will tell you that 98% of the time, it's people living beyond their means. And so it's not just that they want to make more money. The problem is that they need to make more money in order to support the lifestyle that they've created, the big house, the cars, the vacations, whatever it is. And they're willing to make compromises, and sometimes compromises that are irreparable. Almost always, if they had gone to their spouse and said, listen, we're living too big a lifestyle. It's causing me to make compromises that are not healthy, not the ethics that I thought we had when we were younger, when we first got married 10 years ago. And this is what I think we should do. I think we should sell the house. We should reduce our expenses. We should live a smaller life. The overwhelming majority of the spouses that we've worked with or that we've interviewed would love for their spouse to come to them and say that to them, because they miss the spouse that they got married to. There's been an actual what's the right word I'm looking for? They've left the marriage. They're living a double life.
Yes.
They're not behaving trustworthy. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're having an affair. What it means is that they're putting things before the sanctity of their marriage, and they're being emotionally unavailable to their spouse. And I can't tell you, the spouses would go, oh my God, I want my husband back, or I want my wife back. Of course, I don't need the cars. I don't need this house. What I need is to have a happy marriage. And if people understood that, they wouldn't be so invested in the stuff and be much more dedicated towards health and happiness and setting a good example for their children, for example. And then we wouldn't have these problems. So the underlying issues here and the drinking and the drugging, they're all related.
Yes.
Because I belonged to a country club for a while, and there was nothing I could convince myself of anything. I could commit, for example, here's a perfect example of that lifestyle. I convinced myself that I needed to join that country club because it was good for business. And that I needed to become a good golfer because a good golfer is able to get more business. So the only way I could be a good golfer during those 10 years was to start every round of golf with a Bloody Mary, and a hit of Demerol.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that I had a very, very loose swing.
Yeah.
Of course I did.
A lot of people are going to relate to this story.
How much business I actually got done, and how much of it actually, I don't know. Wouldn't I have been better off just walking the middle road, the narrower line? Of course, but I didn't know that then.
All right, but you're much more evolved than, again, many people who are always going to be chasing the high, because the high is the immediate feel of like life is good and I'm still invited to the party, and me and my spouse can have a cocktail every night. But for those people that are starting to feel this isn't working for me, but they don't necessarily ready to say, well, maybe I should check out an AA meeting. What would be the next step for somebody who's listening, thinking, okay, I might be in trouble here. I don't want to be drinking every night. I'm not liking the way this is going, but I also can't feel like I can't give it up, or I don't want to give it up. What would you advise them to do? Well,
you could certainly call me.
Okay.
I'm happy to take those phone calls, and I do every day, frankly.
Okay.
And it's not necessarily a legal issue. People don't only call me for legal issues.
Okay, great.
They call me for all kinds of problems. that they're going through, and they don't want the problems to escalate, or they're confused. A lot of them are around drinking and drugging, but sometimes it's other co-occurring disorders. It's gambling disorder. It's overspending. It's under-earning. It's codependence. It's all kinds of things. And I'm not an expert in everything, but I've been through my own story, and I've worked with hundreds of people going through them, and I find them resources. I'm not a social worker. I'm not a psychiatrist. Those aren't, but I've certainly referred a lot of people to people that I trust, and I found are thorough and are caring and can do a good job. But other than that, here's the thing that's crazy. I was acting crazy for a decade. Mm-hmm. And then afterwards, I went to my best friends during that time period. I went to my best friends and I said, I was out of my mind. And why didn't you ever say anything? And what they said to me was, they said, Jeff, we told you hundreds of times. You just couldn't hear it. And to this day, I don't remember them telling me, but I do know that they've confirmed that they did. So it's when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I don't expect anybody listening to this to necessarily self-identify, but some will, or some will say, wait a second, that's like my husband, or that's like my wife, or that's like my best friend. And so the big takeaway from this, or any podcast that I'm on, the big takeaway is I want people to say, I know a guy. Because when they come to them, and they have a criminal justice issue or a drug and alcohol issue, and it's starting to be present. It's starting to be, people are aware of it. I want them to walk across the restaurant or to make a phone call and say, listen, I know a guy. And go to our website. And then the information will be there, and either it resonates with you or not. I mean, although we're a ministry, and I'm a Jewish reverend, that's a whole story. Because I'm a Jew who went to seminary, right? So that's part of the story. The ministry itself it's completely non-sectarian, ecumenical. We don't preach. The people who come on our support group calls are of any faith denomination or no faith whatsoever. We don't push anything.
All right, you mentioned friendship, and that's interesting because, again, I have to imagine that if you're going to finally give up the drugs and the alcohol, it's not going to be the same group of friends that you're hanging out with anymore. So in your own experience, were the friends you went to were like, no, we were telling you, were they the drinking and drugging friends, or no, that was a different set of friends?
I have almost no friends left from before my fall. I would say 95% of them more are people who just walked away. My family and I were radioactive. Wow. There was no way that they were going to come near us. And part of that was, I'm not sure if we were really friends to begin with. I was very successful, and success breeds a certain type of person.
Yes, it does.
But I was also grandiose, and in some ways I was a really great person. I was on the school board, and I coached softball, and I did all those things. But I held myself apart from people. I was somehow better than in this weird way. And then when I fell, my family, we were trouble, and people were staying away. For the other 5% of people, mostly when I came into recovery, I had to learn a whole new way of navigating life and a whole new way of doing things. And although I loved these people, they were my friends, they didn't understand anything about this new way of life. They wanted me to continue to live the life that I had before in some way or another.
Yes.
And they had a lot of advice for me.
Yes.
And I had to learn that I'm not really taking a position regarding them. I'm not saying I'm not listening to you. You're no longer my life. You don't have my best interest at heart. What I'm just saying is that I need to follow my own
Yes.
inner spirit now. I'm on a marathon now that of my own making, but I'm on a marathon, and I have to run at a marathoner's pace, and I have to get all the way to the finish line that's out there somewhere. And within the metaphor, there's a lot of people who wanted me to sprint. They wanted me to do things their way. And if I did, I wouldn't have found what God had in store for me down the road.
Agreed. With you 100%. Yes. Okay. So back to the alcohol or the drugs. My father was a pretty bad alcoholic, and it was a lot of trying and suggesting there's some statistic like 20% of people who go into a recovery program, don't make it. And then they have to try again. Is that statistic true? And why is it so low?
I've heard all kinds of numbers, honestly, that it's the efficacy rate is very low for recovery. The efficacy rate for the recidivism rate for all kinds of programs is low. And I would say that the numbers are skewed.
Okay.
There's very little actual data that proves the case. But I know from working in criminal justice organizations and in working in the ministry, both as in a church in worship capacity, and now as a prison minister, that people self-select into the organizations or into the programs that they want to self-select in. So if you look at the universe of people who have drug and alcohol problems, a very small percentage of those people will self-select into recovery. And then of the people in recovery, a very small percentage of them will self-select into long-term recovery, whatever long-term means, whether it means a year or 10 years, whatever it means. And that's just the process of selection. It's life. What we learn is that life becomes a sorting process, and you sort like nickels, dimes, quarters into a change machine. The quicker we learn how to sort things that are good for us, bad for us, God's will, my will, the more you can say no to things that can't work or are unlikely to work, and the more you say yes to things that are working or are more likely to work, your chances of success are greater.
Yes.
Yet I and many other people spend so much time trying to turn no's into yeses, as opposed to just eliminating the no's, sorting them out, and spending our times on the yeses or the things that are likely to say yes. Now, here's an example. Any of us who are in the service business, who our time is our commodity, we've learned, don't spend time with the no's. Go for the yeses.
Yes, right.
Go for the yeses. And if you're in community organizing, for example, which I've done a lot of criminal justice advocacy, and now you see it playing out in Washington and all kinds of things, you don't spend your time trying to convert no's into yeses. What you do is you rally like-minded people. That's the first rule of community organizing. You find people who agree with you or have enough in common, and you rally them, and that's your base of support. But yet, what we want to do is we want to somehow convert people to the no's to yeses. We want them to follow our way of life or our way of thinking. And if they don't want to, I can't do more work for anybody than they're willing to do themselves. Just I love you. when you're ready for the help, I'm here. But other than that, the best thing I could be is a power of example.
Right.
And for people that show that sobriety works, one, and that two, that there is a life after prison. So again, here's another takeaway for anyone who wants to go to our website, prisonist.org. That's prisonist like feminist, prisonist.org. Go to my bio page, and my bio page is extensive. Now, I'm not saying that because I'm being grandiose. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that everything on that bio page is after prison. So if you think that your life is over, right? If you think your life is over because you're going to prison, take a look. There's an amazing amount of stuff I've done after prison. Now, it may not be right for you or for anyone else. I don't expect anyone else to go into ministry, but there is a life out there for you, and a whole life and a whole bio waiting for you. And that's all after prison or after recovery, after getting sober.
Agreed. I mean, everything starts after the fall, and you cannot evolve when you are immersed in either criminal activity or alcohol or drugs. There is no evolution there. So exactly. I'm with you 100%. All right. So this podcast is called the Happy Self Podcast. And I always invite my guests to give their best definition of a happy self.
I guess here's what I want to stress.
Okay.
My recovery, my life is a love story. Okay. And primarily it's a love story between me and my wife, because my ex-wife kicked me out for good reason.
Yeah.
I own that, but I found love in my life. And through that, we've explored the good and the bad and the happy and the sad. And the happy self, the joyful self is mindfulness, is showing up every day without judgment, because I don't really know what's best for myself. If I did, I probably wouldn't have gotten into this mess to begin with. But now every day is an adventure. And the fact that I have someone in my life who trusts me, I never thought I would be trustworthy again. I never thought I could be loved again. So how is that possible? And the answer is through self-forgiveness, through self-love.
That's right.
So I'm not consciously trying to sabotage my life anymore. What I'm doing is I'm dedicating my life to helping others. But the person who comes first after me, the person who comes first is my wife.
Yeah. And
that's who I live with. That's who, and so long as I am dedicated to that, I mean, here's an example. An example is that during the winter months, there's never a day that goes by that there aren't fresh flowers in a vase on our dining room table. Because it's not just that I go out and buy flowers for my wife often, and I do, but I notice when the flowers need replacing, and I go out and buy the flowers before the vase is empty and before the flowers have to be thrown out. Now, what does this mean? What's the lesson here? The lesson is that she knows that I'm considering her. I'm considering her happiness. I'm considering her, and I get to live in the joy of knowing that I'm actually showing up for myself and for someone else in this world. And then it permeates from there. It just grows from there. It's not just my wife, it's my kids, it's my community, it's everything else. I've become a good person, a good citizen. But it comes from the little things, not from the big things. So many guys think, oh, I've been inattentive. I'll go buy my wife a car. And buy her a car or not, that's your business. That's not my, but I guarantee you that she will appreciate you noticing the little things And that's really what builds a strong relationship with your spouse, with yourself, and with God.
Love it. I absolutely love it. It's a great message for Valentine's Day, and you'll have to come back and do something on happy marriage as well, because you and I agree about that. It's a sacred union. And so, all right. So Jeff, this has been absolutely amazing. If people want to reach out to you, tell us again how they can do that.
Easiest way is through the website, prisonist.org. We have a white collar support group every Monday night. If you have a white collar situation, we have resources for families and friends and the greater white collar community, all on the website at prisonist.org. And my email's there, my phone number's there, and everything else. And you don't have to fill out any one of those forms. My phone number is there. My email is there.
Great.
And I get calls all day from people. We do the best we can in terms of getting back to people promptly. And so 2 other points I'm going to make about contact. 1, half the people who contact me are in the middle of the night because they're up at night freaking out.
Right.
And they're looking through, they're going through the internet for any resource they can find. They're voracious readers. They're looking for the needle in the haystack. Don't be afraid to text me, call me in the middle of the night. Everything's shut off. You're not going to wake me up. But when I get up in the morning, I'll respond. The second thing is, or someone on our team will respond. The second thing is that almost half of the calls we get are from family members because the guys are locked up. You know, they're in flight, fright, or freeze, and they're locked up and they're afraid. God, I'm just saying guys because it's mostly men. And so call on behalf of a family member. It's okay. We'll guide you through the process. You don't need to understand. We understand the process, and we're happy to help. And sometimes that means we're going to work with your lawyers, and sometimes it means that you don't have a lawyer yet and you need some resources for that too.
So I love that. And that's a beautiful invitation, because when you are a family member who loves somebody who's in trouble, you know, you do need a resource as well. So that's a beautiful invitation. This has absolutely been a wonderful and very profound interview. And I think we should absolutely do it again. And I think a lot of people will be moved by everything you had to say. So thank you very much for today.
Thank you, Tracy. Blessings to you.
All right. Blessings to you too. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.